This is Nadir, or Nadir, I think both are technically correct. Basically the opposite of a zenith, the lowest possible point of something. This game is a deck builder, but they decided to basically throw out all of the conventions that you're probably thinking of and used to when it comes to these games, and basically start again from scratch. So almost every mechanic that this game has is unique. It's something that's very different, and that kind of thing is really important in a genre with as many games as this one, especially with new ones coming out all the time. One of the best ways to stand out is to basically challenge almost all of the conventions about how these sorts of games normally work and completely do your own thing, and that's what we've got here. But the first thing to say is the visuals of this game are really good. Like, the artwork is fantastic. The whole aesthetic it seems to be going for is this sort of Bosch-esque dark fantasy hellscape. It looks really awesome. It's got this sort of painted feel to it almost that makes it look, although it's obviously hand-drawn, it makes it look like it's actually hand-painted instead. And although the current status of the early access is very early, because of course it did just enter early access a couple of days ago at the time of recording this video, it does act as a really good proof of concept, because even though it's pretty content light right now, there is enough of each sort of content on offer to actually understand how they want the game to play and what their sort of goals are for it going forward. So the main thing about how it plays is it's based around this dual-sided card system, as you can probably see in the background right now. Every card in your hand is technically two cards, a blue side and a red side, and then at the top of the screen you can see the enemy's cards on display at all times. And instead of playing your cards on the actual enemy character themselves, you play them on their cards, and the color of your card that's played is determined by the color of the enemy's card you play it on. So if you want to play one of the blue sides of your cards, then you have to actually target one of the enemy's blue cards in order to do so. This means that the traditional enemy intent system, as created by Slay the Spire and is generally used by these games, is not the case. Instead of having the enemy have their next action hovering above their head and you taking turns, instead it's sort of always your turn, you could say, and the enemy only acts based on what you do. So basically every card you play is beneficial to the enemy as well in a small way. And the way that it works is instead of using an AP or a mana system, card cost is determined by these little pips that you can see on the bottom of the cards at the top of the screen there, those little circular hollows. And every card in your hand has a cost of either 1, 2, or 3. And in order to play those cards, that many cards of that color have to be face up on the screen. And whenever you play a card with a cost, 1 pip is added to those circles on the bottom of the enemy's cards, and when the pips fill up, that card actually is played. So the enemy takes whatever action is on the card, and then that card flips over to its other side. If you have a 2-cost card, that means that you have to have at least 2 of that color available at the top of the screen, and then it will put 1 pip in each one, and then of course a 3-cost card means all 3 of the cards at the top have to be of the same color in order to play it. So you do have a lot of board manipulation happening because you are wanting to control what side the enemy's cards are on so that you can play what you want to play. In addition to this, also a very important mechanic is that you can reshuffle your hand at any time, or redraw your hand rather, with that little circular button at the bottom of the screen. And this will just discard everything that's in your hand and you'll draw 3 new cards. And when you do this, the enemy's cards will all flip over, no matter how many pips they had left. So you can actually avoid triggering an enemy's card that you don't want to trigger right now by just redrawing and flipping it over to the other side. But there is a cost to doing this, as every enemy has a specific action that they will take when you press the redraw button. It's shown to the right of the redraw button. And also the pips on the side of the card that turns over actually remain, so you can't constantly redraw your hand in order to avoid enemy actions, because once the cards flip back over again, then whatever progress was made to playing them before is still there. There are also some delay effects on certain cards, and delays make you do something when you redraw as well, like healing yourself or buffing yourself with certain just positive buffs and things like that. And sometimes the enemy's action can also be good for you. There's one enemy in particular that will increase the strength of both you and him whenever you redraw, so you actually both get stronger every time you redraw, but he has very hard-hitting cards, so you don't want to do that too often. So basically the game is all about managing the enemy's actions and playing your cards in the most advantageous way possible so you get the maximum number of your own actions per enemy action. And in fact, it's actually possible to trigger 1, 2, or even all 3 of the enemy's cards in one turn if you're not careful, and have yourself just take a massive amount of burst damage or something because you had a whole bunch of effects resolve at once. So you do need to be careful about which costs you play on which cards, because you do get to choose every time you play a card which one to play it on, so you can place these little pips however you want. And this is why that some one-cost cards actually do things that are negative for you, because it's actually a good thing to be able to only apply progress to one card at a time, because it allows you to control the board with more detail, basically. So as a cost for having such precision, some one-cost cards are actually negative or do something bad for you in exchange for giving you finer control of the board. And every enemy has their own set of 6 different cards. And the cool thing about this is the enemies are designed really well, really cohesively, so that their cards work together in a certain way to make them more challenging. Like, you'll rarely see an enemy that's just like, does damage, does more damage, and that's kind of all it does. They tend to have some sort of synergistic effects to them. There's actually one particular elite enemy that comes to mind that's really fun to fight, because it uses this mechanic that I've never seen on any of the other enemies before, and it's basically a mechanic that makes it to where there's one specific red card that if you play it, does a fair amount of damage to you and then gives him a debuff. And this debuff makes it to where the next blue card of his that you trigger doesn't work, but still flips over as if it did work. And there's one particular blue card that he has that's like extremely dangerous, that you really, really do not want to go off, because it won't lose you the match instantly, but it makes it very difficult to win if this card is actually allowed to be played. So the idea is to get this debuff and then force that blue card specifically to be played next so that it doesn't do anything, and then it flips back over again, and you time the rest of your attacks to make sure you're always cycling that debuff and then that specific blue card, so that no matter what else you're doing, whatever other things you're doing to this particular enemy, you're always keeping that specific order in mind. And it's enemies like that that show the benefits of a system as focused and different as this, because it allows encounters to be like puzzle fights almost, where you have to take all of the enemy's different cards into consideration and the orders in which you actually want to trigger them to be as least bad for yourself as possible. Another thing this game does differently is that aside from the small handful of cards that each character starts with, there actually aren't any pre-made cards in this game. Instead, every time you beat a battle, you get to choose one red and one blue card segment, and they can be of any cost. It doesn't matter, you can just choose one of each color. And the adventure map is split into circles of hell, basically, so every map is one circle, or every step of the map is one circle. It'll have at least one combat on it that you have to do before you can interact with any of the other nodes on that circle. But then once you do, there's other things, like sometimes elite enemies for extra rewards, or shops that allow you to spend these soul stones on extra card pieces and things like that. But one of the nodes that you'll almost always find is this little altar thingy that allows you to actually mess with your deck. And when you find one of these altars, you can combine the 2 card halves you have to make your own cards. So rather than getting specifically pre-made cards, you're actually combining one red and one blue segment to make your own. The only catch is they have to have the same cost when you combine them. You can even dismantle any of the current cards that you have in your deck for free at these altars, and then just repurpose the segments that made up that card in order to combine into new ones if you want to. So this is a really cool system because it encourages build variety, technically, and it just encourages you to come up with your own strategies and your own unique ways to play that character, because instead of having a set number of specific cards, you just have a bunch of pieces that you can fit together however you want to make your own strategy. As you complete battles, you'll also get resources. There are 3 different sort of archdevils that you can face, and each of the 3 has their own resource that they're associated with. So all of the enemies that you face on that particular track will drop those specific resources. So if you want to farm filth for something, because there's a resource called filth, then you want to fight Beelzebub's underlings because they drop filth. And throughout your run, you'll just be gathering a bunch of these resources. And if you die, you go back to the hub area and you keep exactly half of the resources that you gathered in the run. Or at any time when you're on the adventure map, when you're not in battle, you can choose to just leave that run right there and keep 100% of the resources that you've gathered so far. So this is the best way to do it. Obviously, if you're feeling like you're low on health or you don't have a lot of hope for winning the next combat, you can just cut and run right there and bring all your resources back to the hub. you then use these resources to construct more buildings for yourself, and the buildings have all sorts of different uses, from unlocking new characters to play, to unlocking new resource types and enemy types to actually fight, to giving each character more card variety, including special buildings that cost an elite resource that you can only get from killing elite enemies, but they give you rare cards that tend to be quite powerful segments that you can combine to create some really neat stuff. So you definitely want to be gathering all these resources and upgrading your thing, your tower thingy, in order to have all these extra buildings and stuff, because it really drastically improves the mechanics of the game, honestly, because it gives you a lot more card variety, and it also adds new nodes that you can find as well, entirely new ways to upgrade yourself and run, and new ways to help make things easier for you, because the game's actually quite challenging, I should mention. It is really hard. I actually haven't beaten one of the tracks yet all the way. I've gotten to the final fight several times, but I've never actually beat it so far. So as it stands right now, it's a really cool package because it is a familiar genre done in a very, very unfamiliar way with a killer art style. But as for the early access, as for things that I would change or other things like that, well, for one, the game is a little bit buggy. Right now, there are a couple of interface bugs that crop up every now and then where buttons don't respond correctly or things don't show correctly. It's not like anything massively game-breaking, but the game definitely does need a couple of bug-fixing passes when it comes to its interface and how it actually acts sometimes. But honestly, I would say the main thing that this game currently needs right now is just variety. At the moment, it just needs more build variety, more variety in how to play the characters, which is, of course, the kind of thing that's going to be added in an early access campaign like this anyway. But as of right now, if you're used to something like Slay the Spire, every character has 3 or 4 different ways to play them, different sorts of keywords that they can choose to focus on that particular run. But as it stands in the current state of this game, each character really only has one main way to play them right now, because they just don't have enough card variety to break out of that too much. So Jeanne is mostly about buffing herself, gaining tons of armor, and doing small but reliable hits of damage while buffed as much as possible, whereas Vlad, who is really fun to play, is mostly about debuffing enemies in a couple of different ways, as well as doing the special devouring damage, which is basically life leech, and setting himself up for huge crit combos, because he has the precision buff, which guarantees a critical hit on the next attack. So that's the main way that you're going to be playing each character right now, and it would be cool to see that expanded in the future with, giving Jeanne some other cards, like maybe some light magic cards to give her more of like a paladin-y feel, because she's already like halfway there. Maybe stuff that does damage based on her current armor. Maybe combo cards that if you play them in a specific order, they have extra effects, and that would determine how you actually want to build them yourself, because you want to build your cards in a way that you can play them in the combo correctly. As for Vlad, I'd like to see stuff like more life leeching, more debuffing in general, maybe stuff that does damage based on the number of debuffs you've been able to stack, stuff that amplifies stacks, stuff that allows him to pay his life in order to deal more damage or have more potent effects, like a sort of power at a price kind of concept, things like that. I think there's a lot of room to expand each of the current characters that's available to have some even more interesting stuff for each of them. But that's my current thoughts on Nadir as it stands right now. It's a really fun game because it does something so different with a genre that I already know that I enjoy quite a lot. So the link will be in the description below this video if you would like to check out the Steam Early Access page for yourself. Thank you guys very much for watching, of course, and I'll see you next time.